was to make disciples of the principles of the kingdom of God. That was what Jesus' purpose was when he came. That's what he began to do. Make disciples of the principles of the kingdom of God. And we think, no, his goal was to come and die. Well, if that's the fact, then Alice, your goal on earth was just to be born and die. Jesus had a purpose, and death was not his purpose. That was the end goal. That was the finalization. His death was the cherry on top, if you will. Or the whipped cream, and his resurrection was the cherry. But all through his life, he fulfilled his purpose. His purpose was to teach people how to be disciples of the principles of the kingdom of God. That was so if I sing the song "To Be Like Jesus, to be like Jesus," or if I say, "I want to be like Jesus," what does that mean? That means that my goal is to live and teach others the principles of the kingdom of God. To live and to teach them. To live, that is being like Jesus. So when he begins, he's talking, now we read through all of this in Matthew 5, and then he talks about the salt of the earth. And then in verse 17 he says, "Don't think I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I've come not to destroy, but to fulfill." And then he said, it's never going to pass away till heaven and earth are destroyed. The law the principles of God will never pass away. Never, until the earth is destroyed. And how many of you are still living on planet Earth? Right? Well, you should be. If you're not, come back. E.T. phone home. We're living on planet Earth. How many of us look up to the skies and see the heavens? How many of us feel heaven touch earth? How many of us witness the presence of God coming from what we consider the heavens and reaching deep into our souls? So we know that heaven and earth, it's still here. It hasn't changed. There's not a new heaven or a new earth. It's still the same old heaven and the same old earth. The same one that Adam walked on, the same one that was flooded, Noah's day, the same one that Moses delivered people from, the same one that Abraham walked on. This is the same earth that Jesus walked on, the same one that Paul walked on. It's the same one that Smith Wigglesworth. Nothing has changed. Society has changed, but the earth is still the Lord's and everything in it. Now that's a good point. Society has changed, but the earth is still the Lord's and everything in it. And so he said, till heaven and earth pass away, not one commandment will pass away. And then in verse 19 he says, and whoever breaks one commandment, or whoever teaches another person, you don't have to do that. That's old school. That's what they said of old time. You don't have to do that. He said, you're the least in the kingdom. Now, he's not dealing with everybody being a disciple. He's trying to make disciples. And he said the disciple is going to be the one who is persecuted, who is going to be laughed at, people are going to say lies about him, just like they did the prophets. He's making a definition. between what a true disciple is, because remember, his goal was to make disciples of the principles of the kingdom of God. His goal was not to save the world. His goal was to make disciples of the kingdom of God. And that's something that we have to switch in our head, because we're so filled up with this mentality that the purpose of Jesus was to save the whole world. Well, if that was his purpose, then he failed, because people have gone to hell since he died. Wow. I mean, think about it. If that was his purpose, then he failed his purpose. But if his purpose was to make disciples of the kingdom of God, he was very successful. And even today, his success continues on. His disciples are still living today. And so, you have to switch your idea of what Jesus came to do. He didn't come to kill the law. He didn't even come to die so that the law could be abolished in him. His goal was not death. His goal was to make you a disciple. So when he said, now anyone who disobeys one of these commands or teaches somebody else to disobey these commands, you're the least in the kingdom. What is he talking about? The kingdom of God. His whole goal is what? Making disciples of the kingdom of God. You're not in the kingdom of God if you're not a disciple. And if you teach, or if you yourself believe that breaking one of those principles of his kingdom is okay, he said, you're the least in the kingdom. But he said, whoever does the principles of God and whoever teaches others to obey the principles of God, these are the greatest in the kingdom. He's making a distinction for discipleship. He's making a distinction to show who really matters in the kingdom of God. Well, everyone does, because God